Welcome back to the Jagged Moon podcast. My name is Dr. Paul Hamilton, and I'm here with Professor Hunter Reeve. And we are here to talk about the price of the sacred, our topic today. So I want to frame this autobiographically to give us an anchor for our discussion so that you can understand the topic. For me, the price of the sacred sounds very abstract in a certain way, but it's very concrete. Because recently my mother passed away, and she was also Professor Reeve's best friend. And we've been thinking a lot about the sale of my mother's house. And I realize that this has been a kind of a theme in my life, that this selling of houses. And I was trying to make emotional sense of selling something that feels so personal, is so personal. A house that contains so many different memories. And I think even more so, this house that my mother made into her own kind of work of art and was a focal point for her love for the last 25 years of her life. And it just seems so strange to me to sell this house, and financially it makes complete sense. It makes logistic sense in terms of my life. It's just not it really doesn't make any sense to keep it. But I would like to focus in this episode on this this balance between the things that are sacred and the things that and what we sometimes have to do, which is to convert them into commodities in order to get on with our lives in a very practical sense. And it feels like a violation. I feel like, in a personal sense, I spent my entire life, I define my entire life as being somebody who's focused on the particular, a particular relationship, a particular place, bringing something into being and learning how to love it in all of its individuality. And so to me, this idea of taking this house that is so sacred and that I've seen in such particular detail and putting it on the market seems like a violation of everything that I believe in. It's not just another kind of house sale, or even just a kind of sad house sale. It seems like, to me, a violation. And so I wanted to explore this idea. How do we, who are writers, who are poets, who are teachers, artists, how do we make a defense of the sacred in this world that always seems to be asking us to exchange the things that are the most sacred to us in order for us to survive, into commodities in order for us to survive? How do we continue to affirm our belief in the particularity while realistically living in the world? So that was quite a long introduction. It's quite a personal podcast for me, and I would love to hear Professor Reeve's thoughts on this subject.
I'm glad to talk about this, and it's an issue that rings very sacred to me, who have moved many times, but the last time I was pretty stationary for 25 or so years in one place. I wanted to shed some light on Chief Seattle, who believed that the land is sacred and the land belongs to the people, I mean his people he was talking about, and their great reverence for nature. I think that the sacred is the land, and I believe that. However, Dr. Hamilton was talking about how we need, just because our lives are practical, quote unquote, to make this sacred land into commodity, and it's a very difficult choice. So I want to say, however, if we go to the Buddhist philosophy, we realize that we, in the long run, are without anything. We're naked, and we come into the world naked and leave naked. But as we're here, I think it's great to make nature sacred and our own personal land, if you will, as sacred as possible. Now, Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'd like to just frame that. You made a wonderful comparison there. You brought up Chief Seattle, and I think that the reference that you're making is to Chief Seattle's famous letter to the president when the U.S. was, I think, by compulsory means buying land. And actually it seems quite a good deal, actually, relative to some of the situations where they just stole land. But he was being, I guess, forced to give up a large swath of territory that had belonged to his people, and the letter that he wrote, we have a sort of dramatization of that letter. I think this is not the exact words of that letter, but it is a kind of dramatization of that, interpretation of that letter, which I think does capture the essence of what he was getting at, which is that there is something sacred and irreplaceable about the land that that his people understood, and that the Americans did not really understand, because they saw the land as just an exchangeable commodity, something that is just fungible, that is exchangeable with anything else. And I think that that's the problem, that the something that has a personal meaning to us is not, there's a part of it that is fungible, but there's a part of it that is not, that is irreplaceable, that has the fingerprints of our loved ones on it.
Yeah, I wanted to give an example of that. I just thought of when my son lived in the desert, me taking my dogs out far into the desert and feeling free, because the land didn't belong to particularly anyone, but it was everybody's land. And that, I felt like the quality that Chief Seattle talked about. It was sacred. It was bare because it was a desert, but it was gorgeous because it had cacti, and it had the sky, and it had the stars, and it had wilderness. So it was very sacred to me. But yet, as Paul was saying, when one claims some of the land, and Rosemary and I knew that the land was temporary, but it was Rosemary's, and giving that up and letting that go for her family was very difficult because, as Paul said, the memories and the experiences were very sacred.
Right. It's like losing her a second time.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that for me, it's like there's a million private moments of beauty in that house that the person who buys it will never really understand. Maybe they'll understand some of the beauty of the landscape and things, but it's having a cup of coffee on the balcony in the morning, and the way that the sunlight glances on there, and having the cat sprawled out and drinking and reading my favorite novel, and it's looking at the stars from up on the balcony at night. And I spent a year during COVID of just almost every night going out and looking at the stars from that balcony, and I learned a lot about the stars from that experience in that house, and that's not lost. It's in my memory, but it's invariably attached to that place. So this is from the Chief Seattle letter. I'll just read this and see what you think about this. So the president in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. But how can you buy or sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. I think that the idea that this is utterly strange to him, and I think that this is very much the case with a lot, probably almost every Native American tribe.
And to break in here for a minute, Rosemary planted these gorgeous, colorful trees before she died, and she knew that she wouldn't live forever and they were temporary, but for her they were sacred. She was very concerned about them getting enough water and sustenance, and it was like an extension of her. So that's an example of the land and nature being very sacred to her.
Yes, I mean, I remember on the morning of her death going back to the house, and the workers were there. They were there setting up supports for the young sapling trees that she had planted there and in the yard. And of course those are still there, and they were absolutely beautiful. And I was once again impressed by her taste in positioning those trees exactly in the right place. And like I said, I mean, I felt that whole house, the way she set it up, was a work of art, and was an expression of her love, and was really and the love of that portion, that last part of her life, that last 25 years of her life. It became a focal point for her love. Every work of art in the house, everything, the way that it was positioned, she had she endlessly photographed that property, because that house is it's sort of way out of the way. It's from everybody else that I know in the United States. It's a very, very difficult to justify keeping. It would be hugely impractical to keep it, and so, I end up in the position of selling this thing that seems to be irreplaceable. And I think that what it starts to make me think about is like, where do you stop? Because, and I think that was sort of the moral crisis that this raised for me, because it's when you sell something, and when you're on one hand you're declaring that it's fungible, that it's exchangeable with every other commodity, and that that's not true. It's not, ultimately, and yet there is a logic to that kind of thinking, and it feels like a wildfire, like a kind of temptation, and then I start asking myself, where am I anchored? Am I anchored in anything? Or is it, if it's possible for me to just sell something that that I recognize the love that is at the center of this, and how can I do this, and what does it mean about me and about how I live my life, and does it change how I live my life? Does it make me somebody who would succumb to that temptation on a much larger scale, and I think that it doesn't, but it raises this question: where do you stop? And I mean, I think about we were talking earlier about, not in this podcast, but earlier when we were discussing this topic together, Hunter and I were talking about King Lear, whose daughters start saying, well, why do you need 100 people to be your attendants? He's a king, and of course in Shakespeare's play, we might equate that to his 100 attendants to all, and he in fact says this, to all of the things that we have but we don't need. Why do you need to have that photograph from your mother? Why do you need to have that brooch that she gave you? Why do you need to have that sweater that belonged to her?
Yeah.
Why do you need anything? And his response, well, let me just finish. His response is, reason not the need. That there's something fundamentally incompatible between this, because once you start down that road of reasoning, you can rationalize the destruction of the value of everything, and that's what terrifies me. It's like staring into the heart of darkness. It seems, like a bit silly, but what else means anything if the things that are the most precious, don't mean anything? If you're somehow, it's like an anti-meaning machine or something,
Yeah, and it's very important what you just said. In my own heritage, I was young, I was about in my late 20s, and I was in coastal California, and I parked and left my wallet in the car and made sure everything was locked, because in my wallet I had some very sacred pictures. And when I came back, and with my, at that time's boyfriend, all my pictures in my wallet was gone. The wallet was thrown out, and the pictures were where I don't know. And unfortunately, some of these pictures were history. They were going to be included in a book about my grandmother, who was a great activist. And they were lost forever. And the police thought they were just thrown in the creek, because they found a bunch of things thrown in the creek. And that was very astonishing and sad for me, because I lost a piece of my own history of my picture with my grandmother and on the beach in Santa Cruz. So that's very important. And I think that going back to Chief Seattle, what Paul was saying, that he and Chief Seattle believed in the sacredness of things, of all things. And you could tell by the Native Americans' costumes or wearing apparel, their beauty, the feathers, the jewels. I mean, they made art and nature a part of their being, their essence. So that was very vital. And if we destroy or have destroyed this sacredness, as Paul said, what are we doing and where are we going? I mean, it's all a part of our essence in the cosmos, if you will.
Right. I mean, I think that as we were discussing this topic, I thought about Wordsworth's famous poem, which I think is very, really appropriate and really defines what we're talking about here, where he says, "The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours." And it's as if, like you were saying, when you give up or you make that exchange of the sacred for the commodity, or you convert the sacred into a commodity. There is this point, and there's this point at which it becomes evil, and I don't want to sound melodramatic. I don't think the sale of my mother's house is evil. I think that it's fine. It's not. Well, it's a tragic part of the a tragic and decision that has to be made. But I do think that if you take this thinking to its logical conclusion, if you don't have some kind of way to stand up for the particular thing that wherein all of your emotion, because it's only through particulars that we love. William Carlos Williams has that very famous line, no ideas but in things, which he means that in short story writing, in poetry, it is through the things themselves that carries the things themselves, the particulars that carry the emotion. And of course, we could talk about the aesthetic discussion there, because they have to be balanced with the abstract, as we do in all of our lives, right? But he was trying to he had this kind of rallying cry, because he was trying to get poetry away from the abstractions, and get it locked into the specificity and the particular, because he was aware that that's where our emotion lies. It's in this particular photograph. It's in this pair of glasses. It's in this sweater. It's in this blanket, that my grandmother made. That's where the emotion is, and you can feel it trembling in the stitches of a particular blanket. That's or in that sweater. Hunter has this wine-colored sweater that my mother gave her. It's in that sweater. So I mean, I think that the Wordsworth poem is talks about how we need to dwell in the particular the specificity of place. The world should not be too much with us, and we shouldn't allow getting and spending to lay waste the thing that from which we derive all of our all of our spiritual power from or from which we derive all of our spiritual sustenance. That even if we have to live in a, and of course, like William Carlos Williams, when he was talking about poetry, I mean, even if we have to live we have to connect specifics to abstractions. Of course, just we have to live in a world of commodities. We have to remember that those commodities derive from a particular. We have to we can't get the order reversed. We can't think that the commodity rules over us. We have to think that the life is in the particular, and we have to find a way to honor and respect that.
Right, and it's important to realize that the sacred doesn't have to be anything materially valuable. Robinson Jeffers, in his Thurso's Landing, one of his main characters says to the woman that he likes, "I'll not live my life as a knot between two nothings. Wear a pair of round zeros for pearls." So you can make the sacred even imaginary. You don't have to have something of material value, which emphasizes how important it is to realize that some object or something that seemingly is insignificant is very significant to the individual. And I think that people need to honor property and land much more than they do, as Paul touched upon. That someone buying a house should know something, if they can, about the land and the house that they're buying, and continue on with something sacred and valuable, because the whole thing of Chief Seattle, going back to him, the sky itself is of great significant value, and it belongs to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, but it's also the poets that are able to defend the indefensible, to defend the in the case of America, the wilderness. It was, originally Wordsworth, since we brought up Wordsworth, whose poetry and whose mythologizing really through poetry of the Lake District, which was this beautiful mountainous district in northern England, led to the actual preservation of that area and making it into a national trust. It was because people got so interested in it and they wanted to go and experience the great elevated emotions that he experienced. And so he created a whole, he taught people how to appreciate nature. And I think in America, our great nature poets, I conclude Thoreau as a poet, even though he wrote mostly prose, a prose poet, if you will. Thoreau taught the next generation of wilderness poets and proponents of the preservation of the advocates for the wilderness, the language of the poetry of the wilderness, and he taught them how to value it, and he created a romantic tradition that led to the material preservation of those vast tracts of wilderness, and there is a whole, in the most recent, our most recent legislative package, was Senator from Utah, Mike Lee, wanted to sell off the great American inheritance of the wilderness in the western states to various companies that would exploit them just for as commodities, for their value as commodities. And to me, that is the great example of going to the other side, his intent to do that, which is to sell out the nation's inheritance, wilderness inheritance, as a bunch of commodities to make a few people rich, and to open it up to the private interests. The poets are always the ones who establish this kind of separate economy and find a separate language of value to defend these things. Shakespeare, although maybe not explicitly he sort of lived in the era before the advocacy for the preservation of nature, wrote that beautiful sonnet about time. How with this rage shall beauty hold a plea, whose action is no stronger than a flower. How with this rage, and you think of the rage of commodity sales, shall beauty hold a plea, whose action is no stronger than a flower. And the answer is that actually the poet's action, the action of the flower, is strong.
Yeah, that's very vital. And you were touching upon in California, we're sitting not too far from a famous state park that is gorgeous and is the public land. It's everybody's land, and you can go in there free if you have a bike or want to walk, or someone helps you walk. And I wrote a poem about this ocean, because part of the ocean, because I live above it, and I'll read that. I come to the edge and cry, ocean. Magnificent blue penetrates my heart. Cry, ocean. I walk along the shore. Salt and eucalyptus overcome sadness. Cry, ocean. Rejoice. I always return here. Cries, and I say again, my house is on a hill above the ocean, always lingering, ocean. So that is a poem of mine that I published not long ago in a book, and it's again rejoicing in a part of nature that fortunately anyone can come to. It isn't owned specifically by a company or anything. It's the people's, part of the people's land that you were talking about.
Yeah, that's a gorgeous poem. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you.
Very, very beautiful. Very Whitman-esque in a certain way.
Thank you.
I think that, I guess what I wanted to respond by saying is that I think that's a great example of what I would talk about. Is I think that as poets and writers and teachers, we are the inheritors of, and we really represent the great continuation of the tradition of cherishing. We're the great teachers who teach others how to cherish, how to take the time that is required in order to appreciate and understand the love of a place, or the love of a person, or the love of anything, really. I mean, we're the ones who teach how to do this, and so I mean, this is really ultimately, I think, our our role and our legacy, and it is, an alternative economy. It's an economy of value, an economy of cherishing, an economy of reverence, and an attitude towards the world that sees reverence and continuity, and that we sometimes, as a consequence of this, have to watch as the things that we have learned to value and cherish are destroyed. And I think that which also means that we're witnesses and mourners over the wildfire of destruction of things. I think recently, largely, I think due to climate change, because of the predatory, activity of commodities and human greed. A great metaphor of this, but also a physical place, is Big Basin. Big Basin, the great perennial giant sequoias. Some of them were scarred. The mother of the forest was scarred back in the 5 years ago, I think, around 2020, 2021. You can look it up. 25% scarred. Father of the forest also deeply scarred, and I think the most ancient of all the trees was lost, due to that is a truly sacred spot, and actually nearby where we are right now, 20 or 30 miles from where we are, and that was desecrated by human, not directly, but ultimately by human greed, because those wildfires are more active than they would have been. So I think that sometimes you have to be the witness, to all of the treasures, all of the precious things that are lost. But it can feel as if you're, like, to use Shakespeare's line, that you're dangling, you're holding on to this little flower, in the middle of this great rage, and it feels like it's not very strong. But the truth is that we're also the stewards of these, the seeds, which as Kim Stafford recently reminded us, that they seem like tiny things, but actually, all of the forests and all of the flowers that we see and all of the plants began as seeds, and they're actually, they seem very fragile. What is a poem in comparison to the insatiable greed of the great corporations, the depraved indifference to human life that animates these things. It seems very weak, but actually, if you look over time, it can be surprisingly durable. And the extent to which the American wilderness has withstood so many different assaults and so many generations of industrialists who wanted to convert them all into the wood chipper,
right.
Has shows that those battles are not always lost. Maybe many of them are, but the language and the thing that we are stewards of is surprisingly durable.
And a poem that talks inadvertently about this is a poem by Witter Bynner, and it reminds me of Rosemary, who planted these beautiful trees coming home one day and looking at her front door, and I'll quote it. "When I walked home forgotten, when I walked home in grief, I found a letter under my door. It was an autumn leaf." Now that poem and that leaf sounds maybe at first insignificant, but it's meaningful and sacred to the poet. And he was very reverent toward nature. And again, it goes back to Chief Seattle, who took the most minute part of nature to the grandiose part of nature and worshipped it and had such great reverence for it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, in my time living in the, two Inupiat villages in northwestern Alaska, Wales and Brevig Mission, my experience there was that, the Inupiat, and I think that this is probably true more generally of Native American people in terms of their traditional beliefs, their traditions and beliefs, that they hold this idea of the land as sacred and this continuity of life. And I remember so clearly how alive everything was, to people, what it was like to be in a world that, of course, is you won't idealize people, but to live with people in a world that was that was alive, where there was real connection to nature. And I think that this is also what poets do in our. I think that they, for tens of thousands of years, they didn't have the same kinds of pressures that we have in our world, and I think the Romantics were brilliant at identifying what those forces were early on. And I think that for me the moral question is, how, we're inculcated into this, as poets, as teachers, as artists, into this kind of a world where we are stewards of the sacred. And I think that but I can also see the temptation of seeing the world from this purely commodity point of view of commodity exchange. It really is like a wildfire, and once you disassociate or separate from the a connection to what is sacred, the particular, then it's very easy suddenly to start seeing everything like a commodity. And then, at some stage you become like Mike Lee and you just want to take a whole swath of the wilderness, and you don't, all of the sublime American wilderness just becomes reducible to you to what, to the commodities that it's reducible to. And to me that is a I'm not saying, I don't know whether he personally is evil or not, I don't know, but I think that impulse can go that far, and that is even that, and it terrifies me, because I think that when you because where do you make your stand, against that force of the commodity? How do you anchor your feelings in something that is true and lasting? How do you make a defense in the midst of these forces that want to convert everything that we love into something, a commodity.
Right, and that's the question, and we're hoping that people realize this. Many of you already realize this, and spread the word of commodity versus the sacred. It's very vital in this day and age.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go on.
No, I finished.
It occurs to me, like, this question is sort of, what does it mean to be a steward of the sacred? Like to be a steward of what are the moral responsibilities that we have? Because I feel like there's some types of knowledge that once you know, you have, they imply a duty and a responsibility, and that's the reason why it's so painful to sell that house, because to know a person's love and to know how, in particular detail, how they expressed that in every way that they organized their living space and their world, and to have that knowledge implies a responsibility. And what is that? Maybe that responsibility isn't necessarily just in keeping that house as like a temple to her, but maybe it's in something else. Maybe it's in kind of trying to understand what my responsibility is as somebody who continues this, who is a steward of this tradition of cherishing, and who, as opposed, maybe that's what it is.
Right. I think it's very vital to take that knowledge and insight on and carry it to other people. I think it's vital.
Right. And so I don't know. I mean, I would like to. I'm thinking about what is that moment where, because I think that there's how do you how do you
measure the sacred versus the commodity?
Yes, really, exactly. And I think that there's you brought up Buddhism earlier, and I think that there's two levels there, because I think that, so like, to me there's one level which is the way that the commodity renders everything exchangeable for everything else, right?
Right.
And from that point of view, there's no morality whatsoever.
Right.
It's just, if people could be sold, they would be sold, and they are sold.
Right.
Like labor is just whatever it is. It's the lowest possible price that can be exchangeable. And then there's Buddhist emptiness, which is this larger spiritual concept that I think is that ultimately we do have to let go of everything, in a larger sense, which doesn't mean that we give up on the idea of a legacy either, but ultimately in a personal sense we have to let go of everything, or whether we will, whether we want to or not. It's it's the nature of life that is a change. It's endless change. Attachment, is the cause of suffering, and I think that I've always felt that the Buddhism has this deep ultimate truth.
But whatever one's religious belief or spiritual belief, perhaps what one imbued in one's soul, nature and what surrounded us as beauty carries on to a larger scale. Now there's composting human remains, and this is a rather long process, but the soil that remains of the human individual can be given to the family to grow a tree, flowers, gardens, whatever. So perhaps we live on in that respect. That was a part of our nature as a living human. We become life in another form.
Right. I mean, I think that our separation from nature, or at least our perception that we're separate from nature, is temporary, very temporary.
Right.
I mean, we really are never separated.
No.
The air that we breathe is connected to all of nature. I mean, the lunacy of the idea that we are, somehow amputated from, the earth, or in dominion or something like that we're not always connected, is just utterly idiotic. It's always been, I've always felt that way. But yeah. So anyway, did you have any other concluding thoughts here?
Think we've
okay.
covered.
I think that, yeah. So I would invite people to contribute. Either you can contribute in the comments, or and I would be interested in where people feel this this line is, like there is this kind of practical necessity, like that we have to get by, and so we all have to at some point, unless we're independently wealthy, convert our own labor into a commodity in some respects. And if we live long enough, we're lucky enough to live long enough, usually we end up selling most of the things that we have once had and that we have once cherished. Unless you're that rare person who lives in their original family home, in which case I'd be interested to hear about that as well. But if you are in that situation, like, where do you draw the line? And I feel like in my own case, I think about where do I repose my sense of of peace. I repose my sort of spirit, when I feel as if there is this great momentum towards disconnection and dissociation. And I've always felt like this is like, if the moral life isn't about respecting and reverencing even our connection and our the intuition through which we are able to love, which is through the particular, through the particular place, a particular person, their face. If it's not honoring and respecting that, then what is it? And so how do we, how do we balance this life where we, many precious things that we love, will ultimately be lost, and how do we yet continue to stand up for those precious things and continue to pass on that language that makes others the stewards of value.
Yes, it's the question, and it's very vital that we do so, that we honor the sacred as we've talked, as we've defined it, and as Chief Seattle defined it.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And again, love to hear your comments on this topic, and love to hear from you about anything else that you want to talk about. Okay, thanks very much. Have a great day.